Welcome to Keys Consumer Math and Personal Finance. This is section 2.1, Customary System. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about systems of measurements, and we're going to begin with what we use here in the United States. We can call it the customary system or the U.S. customary system. It's derived from the British imperial system, which was derived from a mixture of Roman, Celtic, Anglo-Saxon, and customary local units from the Middle Ages. It was based on body parts, and nothing was standard. They standardized it in 1824 in England, but then they moved in 1965 to the metric system. But in the United States, we still employ the customary system, which is a duodecimal system, duodecimal meaning base 12, not base 10, and that came from the Roman times. It is not simple, but we are used to it, so it seems pretty simple to us. And that's what we're going to review today, is our customary units and how to convert from one customary unit to another customary unit. Up here on the screen, you see a chart. This chart is on page 34 of your book. You'll be using this chart for all the work that we're going to do in the next few sections. So keep it handy. On the left side, you see that we have length. There are a couple of things that you're probably not used to. You see a rod there, which is 5.5 yards. And then in the top, middle, and the right, we see capacity, which is how much something is, how much of something you have. In the middle is dry, on the right are liquids. And in the very bottom of the middle, you've got weight, how much something weighs, obviously. I do want you to notice that in the capacity, we've got 8 ounces equals 1 cup, but in weight, 16 ounces equals 1 pound. 1 is how much you have of something. That would be the capacity, the liquid capacity. In weight, it's how heavy something is. So 16 ounces to a pound is not the same as 8 ounces to a cup. In this section, we are going to practice converting between the units of the U.S. customary system. So, for example, we'll convert, like if we had 5 yards, how many feet is that? Or if we had 24 ounces, how many gallons is that? In order to convert between these units, we need to know two things. We need to know a conversion factor, and then we need to decide if we're going to multiply or divide. So we need to start with the conversion factor. A conversion factor is the number of smaller units needed to equal one of a larger unit. For example, if we were going to convert from feet to yards, the smaller unit is feet, so the conversion factor would be 3 because there are 3 feet in 1 yard. Or if we were going to convert from ounces to gallons, then we would look at how many ounces there are that make up 1 gallon. The conversion factor would be 128 because 128 ounces makes up 1 gallon. Now, you can't see that from the chart, but you can figure it out using something called dimensional analysis, and we're going to learn how to do that in this section as well. But just as a review, a conversion factor is simply the number of smaller units it takes to make up one of the larger unit. And then from there, we need to decide if we're going to multiply or divide. This is where students tend to get confused, but if you think about it logically, it makes sense. When you convert from a smaller unit to a larger unit, you're going to divide because it takes fewer larger units to make up the same amount of a smaller one. So you go from a larger number to a smaller number in this case. And then when you convert from a larger unit to a smaller unit, you're going to multiply because it takes more smaller units to make up the equivalent of the same amount in a larger unit. This is going to make more sense when we practice some problems. But while we are still practicing, it helps to look at some charts. This chart that I have pasted up here is on page 35 in your book, and it shows you the larger to smaller units. So for example, with length, the larger unit is mile. You go all the way down to the smaller unit, which is inches. With capacity, dry, you go from bushel down to pint. Liquid, you go from gallon down to teaspoon. And with weight, you go down from ton to ounce. You will use this chart to determine whether or not you're going to multiply or divide, and then you will use the other chart on page 34 to determine your conversion factor. So let's practice a couple of problems together. Look at example 1 on page 35. It says to convert 5 yards to inches. The way we're going to do that is we're going to start by determining our conversion factor. Look on the chart on the left. That's also the chart that's on page 34 in your book. If you can see, there's no direct comparison between inches and yards, but you can look from inches to feet and then feet to yards. Because there's 12 inches in 1 foot and 3 feet in 1 yard, we would multiply 3 times 12 to get 36. So our conversion factor is 36 because there are 36 inches in 1 yard. But now we need to determine if we're going to multiply or divide. So because we're moving from a larger unit down to a smaller unit, we are going to multiply. You can see that from the chart. So when we go from larger to smaller, we multiply. We go from smaller to larger, we divide. Okay? So we're going to take 36 and we're going to multiply times 5. And when you multiply those two numbers together, you get 180. So there are 180 inches in 5 yards. Now let's look at example 2 on page 35. It says to convert 17,160 feet into miles. Now that conversion factor is on our left chart already. It says that there are 5,280 feet in 1 mile. So that conversion factor is simple. It's 5,280 is our conversion factor because the smaller unit is feet. Now we're going from a smaller to a larger unit. So in this case, we're going to divide. So we're going to take 17,160 feet, and we're going to divide it by 5,280. And when you get out your calculator and do that, or if you do it on paper, you're going to get 3.25. 5,280 goes into 17,160, 3.25 times. So we've got 3 1/4 miles is equivalent to 17,160 feet. So the process is pretty straightforward. All you have to do is figure out your conversion factor and then decide if you're going to multiply or divide. If you're going from a larger to a smaller unit, you multiply. If you're going from a smaller to a larger unit, you divide. But sometimes it's not quite that simple if the units are not close to each other. So we're going to learn something called dimensional analysis to do that. We're going to look at example 3 on page 35. It goes from 160 ounces to how many quarts? Well, if you look up here on both charts, quarts to ounces or ounces to quarts, they're pretty far away from each other, right? There's no direct conversion between quarts and ounces. So we're going to do something called dimensional analysis, which I'm sure you've done in your science classes before. Dimensional analysis sets up a series of ratios that are equivalent to 1 and simplifies all the way through until you get to the unit you're looking for. So let's work through example 3 to illustrate this. We want to go from 160 ounces to how many quarts is that? So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with 160 ounces over 1. Now we're going to multiply that by 1. 1 is the multiplicative identity, so it doesn't change its value, but it's going to look different. We're going to use ratios to simplify this. So I want my ounces on the denominator because up here on the left they're on the numerator and I want to be able to cancel them out. So I go from ounces, if you can see on the left chart, ounces goes to cups. So there are 8 ounces in 1 cup. That is equivalent to 1. 1 cup is 8 ounces. So then I'm going to move. I don't want cups though. So I'm going to put cups on the denominator here. And how many cups are there in a pint? Well, there are 2 cups in 1 pint. And then I'm going to move from pints, because I want to get rid of my pints, to quarts. And that's what I'm going for. So how many pints are in a quart? There are 2 pints in 1 quart. So here I have a series of ratios. I start out with 160 ounces, and then I multiply it by 1, which is 1 cup to 8 ounces. I multiply that by 1, which is 1 pint to 2 cups. I multiply that by times 1, which is 1 quart to 2 pints. So here, because I can cross cancel, ounces will cancel each other out. Cups will cancel each other out. Pints will cancel each other out. And now I'm left with just quarts. And I get to deal with the numbers. 160 times 1 times 1 times 1 is 160 quarts. And then on the denominator, we've got 1 times 8 times 2 times 2. Well, 8 times 2 is 16 times 2 is 32. And there's no unit because I've canceled them all out. So then I divide 160 by 32 and I get 5. So I'm left with 5 quarts. So 160 ounces is 5 quarts. Now I could have done what we were doing before and simply found my conversion factor, which would be 8 times 2 times 2, which is 32, and then decided, okay, because I'm going from smaller to larger, I'm going to divide. So I'm going to take 160 and divide it by 32, which is exactly what we just did to get 5. I could do it that way. That's fine. But if you don't see the conversion factor right away, or if you feel like there's just too many units to go through, you can do this dimensional analysis instead. Choose whatever is easiest for you. I tend to do a hybrid between the two. Now, the next video, we're going to practice a few more of these problems together.